So as we were talking about rules, talk about one of my first jobs, which was working at State Psychiatric Hospital in Kentucky, and I was working on a unit that was particularly for people who were addicted to substances. And it was a 90-day program, so they were there usually for 90 days, some days longer, sometimes longer if they were having a hard time finding a halfway house of some kind to go to afterwards. And one of the things that I learned very quickly was that you had to keep the rules very tight. The rules had to be very tight on the unit, and everything. There were rules about everything from, like what times you were allowed to have snacks, what times you weren't. You had to eat all your food. We couldn't store any of it in the refrigerator. That's against the rules. It's when it's time. There were times when you could watch TV. There were times when you couldn't. There was a bedtime. There were groups that you had to go to, and if you missed more than 3 groups in a week, you got demoted on your like privileges and stuff. It was a whole thing. There was a huge set of rules, and it was made to keep the structure. Because a lot of the problem that sometimes people have in recovery is maintaining structure. And also, if you don't keep the rules very tight, they have this tendency to use a skill that they've learned to help their addiction, which is manipulating people. Right? They learn how to kind of get you on their side so that you break the rules for them, and then it turns into a whole mess, right? And so there were 2 of us that worked on the evening shift mostly together, me and this other guy named David. We became pretty good friends. The clients on the unit, the patients called us Law Number 1 and Law Number 2. Because we were so strict on the rules. We were kind of ridiculously strict on the rules, right? But that was part of the program, and we learned that. And I was 21. I was 20 years old when I started working there. I was 21. So, they didn't always like taking all these rules from someone so much younger than a lot of them were. But even though they called us Law Number 1 and Law Number 2, after they were there for a while, they also respected us for the fact that they always knew what to expect from us, right? They always knew, yeah, Shawn and David aren't going to let us get away with that. And those rules were there to help protect them in their recovery, right? It was to help strengthen them at a time when they're not really able to make rules for themselves very well. And David and I were talking one time about how it is really hard working on that unit. Sometimes you'd get yelled at, you get cussed out, you'd get whatever, and trying to get people to follow these rules were difficult. And we were talking about, like, how do we do this? How do you live with yourself having to do this? How do we cope, basically? Well, at the time, I was very young and just kind of starting my spiritual journey, right? I had gotten into Buddhism and teaching and learning Buddhist meditation, and my answer to David was, when he's like, how do you do this every day, right? My answer was, well, every night I have to go home and I have to get on my knees and put myself below the people that I'm working with, right? I had to kind of put myself on a lower level than them so that I can serve them. And that's, it was a little bit self-righteous, right? But it was also me trying to learn something about service and about compassion, because when I was sitting on the meditation cushion, in fact, here it is right here. You see it setting up here sometimes. When I was sitting on the meditation cushion, I was meditating a lot on the fact of how we're all so interconnected. And you've heard the Buddhist jokes, right? You ever heard about the Buddhist that went to order a hot dog from the hot dog stand? He goes to the hot dog stand and he says, "Make me one with everything." Took a second to sink in. But that's where I was at the time, right? It's okay. I know. It's a dad joke. I know. It's, but you can, that's where I was, and that was a stage of life that I was in, was really focusing on this. Well, David did not like that answer, which was interesting. He kind of berated me for the answer. He said, "How dare you put yourself below them? You're doing so much better than them in life. Look at the mistakes they've made. Look at the things they've done." Right? I was surprised, because I thought actually David was a quite spiritual person himself. And I was very surprised when I found out that he wasn't happy with that answer. I was like, oh, okay. So when I was in college studying religion and studying philosophy, that kind of put me along this path. One of the things we took in ethics class, there was something where we learned in philosophical ethics, there are these ways that people try and determine whether or not you're living an ethical life, a moral life. And one of those systems that you can work within is called deontological ethics, which is a big word meaning that it has rules, right? So you determine whether or not you're a moral person by your adherence to a set of rules. So if you're a person that points to the 10 Commandments and says, if I follow the 10 Commandments, I'm a good person. Okay, that's your ethical system, as I have a set of rules and that's what I'm going to follow. In philosophy, you get into people like Immanuel Kant, who has the categorical imperative that is the system of how you determine rules. And there's utilitarianism, which has this calculus of how you decide whether or not something's good or not. Those are deontological ethics. I'm sure you all really want a philosophy class right now. But I'll talk about someone else. His name was Aristotle, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, he's talking about Kant and Aristotle. But Aristotle was one of the people that had another set of another way of determining whether you are an ethical person, a moral person. And instead of it being rules-based, it's character-based. So this was set on a set of virtues. It was about cultivating sets of virtues, characteristics, character traits. And I think we're all kind of familiar with this, because how many of you can say, well, I know somebody who's broken the law a whole lot, but they're actually a really good person, right? That's because you're thinking in kind of a character ethics, a virtue ethics kind of way. They have virtues. They have things that are really good that they really try to emulate in their life, even if they don't follow all the rules, all the laws, right? These are kind of two different systems of how we think about ethics, whether we name it that way or not. Jesus is a person who I would say was more in the character ethics or virtue ethics, like Aristotle, right? Whereas who had all those rules and he was always fussing at them because of all those rules? The Pharisees. Their whole lives were based around rules. And if you read the Gospels really carefully, the Pharisees, not all of them are like these horrible, evil people. That's not really what Jesus is saying. Okay, and that's another story. We talk about it in the Bible study sometime. There were Pharisees like Nicodemus, for instance, and like Paul, right? But my friend, back at where I was working, was focused on the rules because they made his life easier. My life's a lot easier if I follow all these rules, right? By not allowing the patients to do this, to do that, and whatever. Whereas my basis for following the rules was trying to engage someone's virtue, someone's characters. And that I had this own virtue, whether it was good or not, because I'm definitely no saint. It didn't always work out for me. But my virtue was I was going to go home and try and humble myself when I thought about the people that I was working with. We were approaching it from two very different ways. And Jesus seemed to teach this virtue ethics, especially in this passage, about what kind of character a member of the kingdom of heaven should have. And in this case, this particular virtue is humility. Right? John and James want to be Jesus's right-hand guys in the kingdom of heaven. They're still kind of thinking this as being like a kingdom like the old kingdom of Israel and of Judah, or like the Roman Empire, or like whatever. They're still kind of thinking of this like empire kind of system. And they want to be like the right-hand guy sitting at the right hand when Jesus is sitting on a throne. And Jesus is like, nah, you still don't get it. Jesus says, whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And Boy, that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. Because even in our world today, we still hold up. Even though we kind of espouse, oh yes, it's very important to be humble and all these kinds of things. We espouse that, but what do? We often go at work and try desperately to go up the corporate ladder, and we try to earn more money, and we try to do all those things. We really set those in our practice as a higher ethical standard than being humble and of being a servant. And as Jesus typically does, he takes everything a little step further. If you notice, he says, whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Servant and slave. It takes it one step further from servant. I think we've talked about in here, if you want to get geeky again, how the word for slave and servant is doulos. One of the words that gets used for those is doulos in Greek. And it can mean slave or servant. But in this case, he actually uses a different word in each cases. In servant, he says diakonos, which means a servant, and it's a little bit more clear of a word. And then he uses doulos for slave, because he's actually setting up where you're taking it a step further. Because that's what Jesus always does. He'll say something and then say, but if you really want to be the first of all, you've got to be a slave to all. Always taking it a step further. And this is very opposite from the characteristics that we often hold up as virtues today. Jesus holds up things like compassion, humility. Well, what do we see in our culture that says something about the traits that we hold up as virtuous? Not that we give lip service to, but that we hold up as virtuous. Sometimes all you have to do is kind of look around you. I've harped on this before in here, but I think bumper stickers are a good way to show somebody. It seems to be this way that people almost feel like they just have this way to express themselves. You ever seen bumper stickers that say, F your feelings? Or flags that people fly in their yard or from the back of their truck that say, F your feelings. It doesn't say F, though. It says a word that starts with F and it rhymes with duck. I won't say it from here. If you're confused, just ask me later. I'll tell you. But it says, F your feelings. People love that sticker. And people shout for that sticker when it goes past in a car. What kind of virtue does that propagate? That is the exact opposite of empathy, which is feeling what other people feel. You know, does Jesus want us to feel empathy, or want us to be completely selfish in our feelings, and that only our feelings matter? What does it say on our news cycle when our news cycle is more, what does it say about our culture when our news cycle is more interested in mugshots than it is with people with mental illnesses wasting away in our jails? Or when our cities and counties worry more about upscale developments than the flooding to our oldest communities? Or than about affordable housing? Or the 2,000 kids in Volusia County School District that are experiencing homelessness? I've heard it said that you can tell the values of a church not by looking at their mission statement, but by looking at their budget sheet. Right? So I know you all know our mission statement right off the top of your head, right? I said it a couple weeks ago. It's to do justice, seek peace, and love all as Jesus loves. Yes, that's our mission statement here at the church. But as they say, you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? So where does the money from a church go? Does it all go to the celebrity pastor you just hired? You all laugh because that's not true here. Does it go to activities for the church? For a new state-of-the-art basketball gym to attract new members? Or does it go to missions that help the community? Does it go to maintaining a building that doesn't just hold church activities, but 12-step meetings, counseling offices, food programs, and the like? That's what we try to do here. Are the church's values such that we use our resources in service of people who need justice and kindness, or towards attracting more members so that we can grow like a new business that's trying to take over the city? Not that new members aren't awesome. We just welcomed 2 last week. I lost count. We've welcomed, I think, over 10 now since I became pastor a year ago, which is amazing, starting with Warren. That's where I started counting. But I lost count a little while ago, but I think we're over 10 now. Warren, Eric, Diane, who's not here today, or Denise, excuse me, who's not here today. Just a lot of people have joined. Woody, who's not here today. Well, where did they all go? Last week we were able to welcome Elaine and Mary Ann, and we just continue to welcome people, which is fantastic. It's all great. But I know that the reason those people became members here is not because we had a state-of-the-art gym. It's not because we have like a million activities going on for church members here, right? We're not a country club. And the new members seem to know that. That's why they became members. They saw who we were, or at least who we want to be, which is servants to everyone. That's all they wanted to be. And that's my challenge to you all. I challenged you last year to think, dream, and pray. When we were talking about our stewardship campaign and those kind of things, you know, we're gifted with that amazing donation from Diana Vanderbilt's estate that allowed us to change the way our budget looks quite a bit, you know, by taking away a significant mortgage expense every month. By the way, we are going to have a ceremony where we're going to burn that mortgage. Yeah, oh yeah, it's going to happen. We're just kind of waiting. I think it's for some of the fall people to come back, right? Some are snowbirds, so they can help us burn it too. But, you know, then that asks us, what are we going to do, right? And remember, I also said, hey, if we stop giving because we did that, that means that everything that we gain just gets taken away. So we have to keep giving, right? But as long as we continue to keep giving, what do we want to do with that? It's really important to be thinking about that. Do we want to hire a youth minister? That music seemed to match that. You want to hire a youth minister, you know, but even at that, what's the point of hiring you? That's like, by the way, that's like number 1 on my list, but on my wish list, because we want to hear, right? What should we do? I mean, even if we were to hire a youth minister, what's the focus of that? Is that focus so that we can attract young families, so we can grow our membership? Or is it because, like when we did Surf's Edge, for example, you know, we were addressing people's mental health concerns too. We were addressing kids who weren't being accepted in other places, right? And we were making space for them, even if they never sat foot in here. Even though some of those kids have sat foot back in here. I got to marry one of them in January, right? So even if we were to hire a youth minister, where's the focus? What about if we wanted to start a scholarship fund? I don't know, you know? What about helping people pay for their security deposits on new apartments? Since if you want to get into a new apartment, not only do you have to pay these astronomical rates, you know, you have to do security, first month's and last month's rent. What if we had some kind of program to help people with it? What if we wanted to give more to the United Church of Christ and Disciples of Christ missions that they're doing, like the things like Neighbors in Need, Great Hour of Sharing that we sometimes collect money for in here? Or do we want to build a space shuttle so we can offer free rides to new members, right? So that we can attract people. What you choose to do with stuff like that, it shows your values a lot more than any mission statement. You know, James and John and the other disciples proved what their values were in this scene. And it's one of my favorite scenes, by the way, in the Gospels. Jesus said that our values are compassion, service, humility, love. And we can still learn that lesson today. My friend back at the hospital all those years ago, he was following the rules strictly because it made his life easier for him. I was trying to follow him because it was making my life harder. I tried to follow my rule, right, of trying to get on my knees for people. I was no saint back then. I'm not now. I don't do it all that well all the time. But it was because I valued compassion, To me, compassion is like, to me, the epicenter, right, of your virtues. But it's not necessarily a virtue in American society today. It's not something that American society holds up as being one of the things that makes you a good person, right? So we have to change that, because you know what? Jesus' movement works best when it's countercultural. It works best when we're not the majority of people. It works best when we're fighting from the underside, right? And saying, from a grassroots movement, we value compassion, even if the world around us doesn't. Because that's what shining our little light, like we're going to sing later about, is about. We're going to shine that little light everywhere we go, so that we can spread values like compassion and humility. I think that's what Jesus wanted us to do. It's to become better people, not just rule followers, right? The Pharisees were the rule followers. He didn't hate the Pharisees, but he was pointing out the difference. There was a difference there. This is why when they came around wanting to stone a woman, right? Wanted to stone somebody who was in adultery. Hey, the rule said you could do that. Does he tell them not to, though? No, he doesn't. He doesn't tell them not to do it. He says, go right ahead. Whoever among you is righteous enough to carry out that kind of sentence, go right ahead. None of them take him up on that offer. The only person who was righteous enough to actually carry out that sentence was him. And he didn't do it. Chose not to do it, because the rule didn't matter as much as the values and the virtues behind it. And we were missing that lesson. That's why the law didn't work so well, because we were missing the lesson of it. So let's keep working here at UCC to become better people, not just better rule followers. Amen? Amen. All right.